Thank you. Yes, I'm going to talk to you about SMURF. And SMURF is about, as you said, scalable, modular, and reusable Rails frontends. And what is SMURF? I mean, it's an acronym. That's pretty sure. And besides that, it's kind of like, I don't know, a vision, an approach, a set of conventions, a gem. And yeah, I don't know. It's not really well defined yet, but you'll figure out a little bit more about what it is during the talk. About myself, my name's Jacob. Let's get the mouse all the way here. My name's Jacob. You can find me on Twitter under my Twitter handle. And I'm a front-end developer at reUsable, which is a little Rails shop in Cologne, Germany. And to kind of like put myself in perspective, fun fact, I'm old enough for actually having built websites with only tables and without any CSS. Who else in the room is in that group? Still most people. We'll see how that pans out in the next couple of years. So I'll start my talk with kind of trying to outline what the problem is that SMURF's trying to solve. Today, we obviously don't have to build websites with tables and no CSS anymore. We actually have a bunch of really awesome tools. We have CSS3, we have Sass, we have Compass, we have Sprockets, and many more things. And actually, in this talk, I'm heavily relying on the usage of Sass. So all my code examples are going to be in Sass, and I'm just assuming that as a given. If you don't know Sass, you should definitely check it out and maybe rewatch the talk or whatever. So yeah, we have all these nice tools today, but I think front-end code still sucks. And let me explain why. So what's wrong? First of all, I think front-end code always tends to be very inconsistent. You know, there are designers in there naming things. There are a couple different developers doing stuff in a different style, and there are different parts of the application that are, you know, done by different designers, and you always it's really always like a kind of inconsistent mess. Then beyond that, we have a lot of tight coupling in the front end. So between HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, like it's really hard to change one thing without also having to change the other. Like if you want to do a redesign of your page, there's like you always have to touch like most of your JavaScript, and you have to refactor a lot of HTML. And yeah, this is just gives us a situation that's quite unflexible. And beyond that, I think like the single responsibility principle doesn't really apply to front-end code yet. So, you know, you have like one thing, like let's say like one CSS class, and that's going to be responsible for styling the thing. That's going to be responsible for kind of like, you know, telling what is the content of this thing. It's also going to be responsible for the interactivity of the thing. And it's like one thing that does 3 or 4 or more things. And again, this leaves us with a situation that's very unflexible. And the last thing is that I think there's often very unclear scope or applicability or responsibility. So if you want to change something in your application, it's not obvious at all, like where do you have to go in the front-end code to make that change. Or the other direction, if you have like something looks a certain way or behaves a certain way in the front end, and to kind of like find the code that actually does that, it's by no means clear or yeah. So these are just like the basic problems that I see why front-end code sucks, and why I sometimes have a little bit of like back-end envy. They have like all their nice conventions and test-driven and stuff like that, and we don't really have that. But yeah, we should do something about it. And actually, it's not only, I think it's not only the code that sucks, but beyond that, I think the whole design process is also kind of unsustainable. Like we tend to design web applications with kind of like a page mentality. It's always like the focus on this one feature that the designer is designing or the developer is working on. And I mean, this is important. You have to get the details right, but it's also important to kind of like have the whole application in mind in order to build something that's consistent and maintainable. And I think we have to get better at that. And I think like just the constant problem is also that like communication between designers and developers is not frictionless by any means. And they just arrive at the same problem from different perspectives. Like, you know, the designers, you know, obviously have this design perspective, like what should the user see, how should it look like, and then the developers kind of like, so we have stuff in the database, we have to present it some way, and this is what where they arrive from, and I think we have to work on this communication to have like better tools to facilitate that. Yeah, and all in all, with all these problems I outlined, I think we kind of like always, at least for bigger front-end projects, we kind of like always end up with like some big unmaintainable, inconsistent mess that nobody wants to touch, or like if you need to do a redesign, you probably have to get like 5 developers and put them in a room for 1 month, and they have to rebuild the whole front end. Otherwise, it's just not going to work because, you know, it's all tangled, and yeah, so not so cool. Let's try to do something about it. I said that there's something wrong with the code and the design process, but let's focus on the code first. So what can we do to write better front-end code? I have a solution: follow the SMURF. Well, it's actually, I mean, it's definitely not the solution yet or so, but as I said, like we have to start somewhere. And in this talk, I'm just trying to give you just like a couple followable advices that I think, or in my experience within the last couple of years, will definitely lead to better front-end code. Not to perfect front-end code, but better. So let's start. Advice number 1. Stop using IDs in your CSS. And you should, yeah, always use classes. And important is here in your CSS. Don't stop using IDs altogether. This sometimes gets confused somewhere. They're really important for JavaScript and other things, but just in your CSS, avoid them. Who here already like knows about this rule, follows the rule, kind of follows the rule? Some people, not all people. So yeah, let me explain again like why this rule is important, why you should follow it. And the reason behind that is CSS specificity. I really had to practice that word, CSS specificity. And CSS specificity pretty much says that, or is the logic which CSS rule takes precedence over another when they are applied on the same element. And in order to explain like why you should not use any IDs but use classes, I'm going to use an example, and I'm going to use Inception, the movie Inception. This is all going to make sense. So for those, or just like the basic plot of the movie is, you know, we have these different levels of reality and dream realities, and then there are people going between the levels and changing something in the level above. And yeah, with CSS, I think it's pretty similar. I mean, I have to say this is a simplification. Like CSS specificity is actually pretty complicated to really calculate it. But in general, you can say that there are different levels. You know, we have the reality level where we have just like regular element selectors. And then, you know, if you want to change something about reality and override something, then you go one level deeper and use classes. And like a CSS selector with a class is always going to override an element selector. And then beyond that, here come the IDs, and then if you go one level deeper, you have like inline CSS, and then if you even go deeper, you have important, and then the dream's collapsing, and you don't want to go there. So the advice here is to stick to those first levels, like element selectors, and well, you should probably avoid them too, but you know, stick to those class selectors and only resort to the deeper levels that can really get you in trouble if you really need to. Because if you do that too early on, then you know this option is not going to be left anymore, and yeah, you're going to end there, and that's not what you want to do. Okay, so let's get to the next advice, and this is get beyond the semantic markup myth. What do I mean by that? The semantic markup myth, I think that like with HTML5 as a buzzword, and you hear that everywhere, that you know you should use all the correct and semantic HTML5 elements, and then everything is going to be awesome. Computers can read your website, and everything's going to be magic, and I'm a little skeptical about that. So what do I think is wrong with that? I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. Don't get me wrong on that. There are a lot of use cases where semantic HTML makes a lot of sense for screen readers and for search engines, but these are always like very particular use cases, and I kind of had the feeling that it's always presented as this like global solution for everything, and I think that's just generally overrated, and it's just definitely not. I mean, definitely do use semantic markup where it makes sense, but kind of be a little bit more. Yeah, you have to go from situation to situation. And what I can definitely say, without any doubt, is especially when it comes to CSS, don't use it. So if we have like some new fancy HTML5 section article markup, for a lot of people, it's just tempting. If our objective is to style the section titles here, okay, we already know, like, we have these H3 elements inside a section, and we can just, nest our CSS in that certain way, so we style those H3 elements. Looks pretty straightforward and very semantic and could be awesome, but there are a lot of problems with that. First of all, if we do something like that, we have no separation of concerns between the structure and the style of the website. So we can't change one without also changing the other. And like you see an H3 and you don't, in your code, and you don't know what is it there for. Is that going to communicate something about the importance in the structure, in the content, or is that going to communicate something about the styling? And if there's like no additional information, you just don't know. And yeah, it also introduces tight coupling between your CSS and your very specific markup. So if all of a sudden you I don't know, get rid of some headlines and the H3s suddenly become H2s, you also have to refactor all your CSS. So you want to avoid that. And in general, element selectors, they have some selectors that end with some HTML element instead of like a class or so. They just have like a general problem that they can lead to possible performance problems if it's like a very common element, because CSS selectors are matched from the right to the left, and it can lead to unclear applicability because we style like the H3s in our sections, and if like maybe somewhere down in our section we have something else that also uses H3, then this is also going to apply to that, and I'll also get to that in the next advice. So the example that we just saw, how to do it better in a more modular way, we just have to use additional classes so we can separate the structure concerns with the styling concerns. So in that case, I would just give my titles a very specific kind of class, like section title, and then I'm going to style this, and I will be sure that I'm only styling this, and it's not going to bleed into other things. And it's immediately obvious that the H3 is going to say, this is kind of like what the thing is in the structure, and the section title is, this is going to tell me how this is going to look like. Yeah, that's what you should do. Coming to the next advice. Stop the cascade. What do I mean by that? I'm referring here to cascading applicability. Which is obviously a key feature of CSS because it's cascading style sheets. So what does it mean? Again, and what it basically does is it allows selectors, like we had with the H3, to apply to a large part of a document. Just like an example or so, we have like a selector that's like main container P, and this is going to apply to all the paragraphs that come anywhere in our main container. And I mean, the people that designed CSS, they were thinking about something, and I mean, it can actually enable pretty elegant things. You have, with very little code, you can style large parts of your application, but which is definitely like a pro, but it also has a lot of negative side effects. There's like increased complexity, because like if you style your paragraphs like that, and then you're somewhere down in your in your main container and you have like a paragraph that you use in a totally different way, then you say, well, why does it look like that? And without using Firebug, there's like no way to actually figure out where the style is coming from. And yeah, there's just like uncertainty about the source of the styles. And yeah, as I said before, it can also lead to performance problems because like for every paragraph that we use in our application everywhere, it always has to go up the DOM tree and check whether this is somewhere in the main container. And this might not really be a problem for desktop browsers, but if you have like a page with a lot of CSS on a mobile browser, this can definitely lead to performance problems. So all in all, I think that we need some safeguards there. And I mean, you might totally get away with that for a small application that like 1 or 2 developers are working on. But especially for larger team projects, this like increased complexity problem is really going to bite you after the application has reached a certain age. So yeah, let me show an example where like how you can control applicability and write a little bit more modular selectors. A very, very bad example is what we just had. So, we're using IDs here and we're just using a general element selector, and this is going to match everywhere and nobody's going to know where the style actually came from. And to make it maybe just a little bit better, you can use the child selector. So this is only going to match the links that come first on the first level inside the main container. So it kind of can contain a little bit more like what it applies to. But then we also introduce a big tight coupling problem again. If we introduce like another level where we also want to use that style, this is not going to work. So actually a pretty decent way to do it is just, now we're using all classes, so this is already much better. And we have an explicit class that we use to those links that we want to style in a certain way. So you see that link class somewhere in your markup, and you immediately know, oh, you can immediately search for where is the CSS that is styling that link. And then, oh, fuck, I increased the font size. Yeah, well, I'll just have to kind of read it to you. So this part stays the same, but for the selector for the link, you namespace it. So this here says then main-container-link. So in this case, it's totally obvious that we are only styling the links within the main container. Because a class like link is a pretty generic class. So if we use something else somewhere in our main container that also specifies a link class, these styles are also going to bleed into there. And by namespacing our classes like that, we can really control that they are only going to apply to that part of the site that we're just worried about. Does that make sense, or is that totally unclear now? Yes?
Would it make sense then to not put main container link under main container, just specify?
Yes, that's totally optional. I kind of like the nesting, so I have one module is like one nested scope in my code, but just for the code to work, it's totally fine to leave that off and just have the namespaced link. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so just something that we should keep in mind to kind of stop the cascade and kind of limit the applicability. So we always have full control about the part of the page that we are styling at any given time. So, which brings us to the next advice, structure all your files. The recent versions of Rails with the asset pipeline and Sass are the tools that enable this. And so we should take advantage of that and definitely split all our CSS into individual partials. So every little CSS module or something that's responsible about a certain thing should live in an individual partial. And then we should organize those partials into different folders or categories. And those categories then can communicate different responsibilities. Because not all CSS styles are created equal, in my opinion. We kind of have to differentiate. Some styles are responsible for certain things, and other things are responsible for another thing, and I'll get to that. So a typical SMURF SAS file structure is going to look somehow like this. So you have like a main style sheet that imports all your partials, and you have 4 different categories of styles. And I'll explain a little bit in more detail what those categories are for. So first you have a base category where all like your global foundation styles are going to go. So this is stuff that, you know, all the styling is going to build and rely upon. Like no changes or overrides for that. And also like CSS resets, if you still like to use them. I tend to not like to use them, especially for larger projects anymore, or just like global settings like dimensions or color variables or stuff like that. That belongs to the base category. Then above that we have the layout category, where we worry about grid, positioning, widths, and we kind of like specify faceless containers. So you shouldn't, in that category, you shouldn't start doing like borders and backgrounds and stuff like that. But it would be things like a full width container or a sidebar container or like a column container in like a 3-column layout or so. In the SMURF kind of naming convention, you prefix those with this L dash. You immediately know by looking at a style, okay, this is responsible for laying out, like where this is going to be positioned, how wide it is, or is this going to be responsible for like what this is actually going to look like. And then we have like the bulk of the CSS is going to be written in modules, and they're like reusable, context independent parts of CSS, and they follow this like SMURF naming convention. And examples for that are things like boxes and dialogues and horizontal lists and just like generic things like that. And this could already be it, but it's also important to have like another category for non-modular CSS, because it's really hard to really write good CSS modules, and it's in some cases it's just not worth it. So we need this 4th category where we can just like override things where it needs to happen, or we can, like, you know, if we have to follow this page mentality thing and we have to get one page like really, really specific, then we could use that, do that in the non-modular section. Or it can just be a sandbox for backend developers that don't want to learn this stuff. Which brings us to the next advice, and this is about how to actually write SMURF CSS modules. So what does SMURF CSS comprise of? We have modules that can in turn have module components. They can have modifiers, they can have states, and they can be extended using submodules. And how this looks like in code. Let's cut again. So here we have like a pretty like simple box module, and we'll apply some styles like a border, and then we can have a number of modifiers. Modifiers are things like that, you know, change the module in a very slight way. So we have like, you know, the box on the left and the box on the right, or like a big version of the box and a small version of the box. So they change like one little property of the box, and then they will be put together with the mbox inside the root element of the module. States are pretty much the same as modifiers. The difference is that they are prefixed with this is dash, and that's something that will can change within the lifetime of a module. And yeah, it's mostly like changed using JavaScript. And then we have components. So our box has a header and a body, and the components can also have sub-modules, but you have to be kind of careful to not go too deep there, kind of the inception thing again. And this is what the HTML looks like then. And yeah, as I mentioned before, I kind of like to nest all the stuff underneath each other, so we have like some visual closure in our code that it makes makes it totally clear like this is one box module, but you could actually outdent these components, and the code would definitely still work. With maybe like some slight exception when we extend modules, which I'm coming to now. So now we create a submodule of this box, which is kind of like, a different version of the box for, submodules are going to use either if we have like used the same module in a different use case, or maybe like in a different context. So here we have a different use case. We want to have a box that draws attention, and we're going to use the Sass extend function to kind of inherit all the styles from the box module, and then we override the stuff that makes our box attention box. And we can also, and it's also if you have like a certain context somewhere in your page and your generic module kind of doesn't really fit into that context, you might also want to create a submodule for that. That's kind of like whatever, box inside a table, and then you override the things that you need to override so the box can actually live inside a table. And because we're using Sass extend, we can just, we don't have to use the original mbox selector. We can just use mbox attention, and it will, through Sass extend, it will inherit the styles from the base module. And this is just like the coding convention or so. But the really important thing about SMURF modules is like the features that a module should have is it should be context independent. So in a module, if at all possible, you shouldn't define any like strict widths, but it should be flexible. It should be able to live inside any container. It should be generic. It should definitely be reusable. That's kind of like the definition of a module. It should try to follow the single responsibility principle. You should try to style one kind of thing, and it's not like one kind of thing and also a bunch of other things in there. If you want to read more about it, you can just go to our SMURF wiki, and we have like a little bit more information there, but still in the making. Which brings me to my last advice, which kind of like goes beyond the pure code level, and this is about improving the design process and improving the communication of designers. And for that, I think like a very, very useful approach is to try to create living style guides for your code. Why is this important? It's most important because modules need to be reused. We took all this extra effort to kind of put additional classes in our markup and to kind of lay it all out and think about generic things that we can reuse. And if those modules are not going to be reused, all this effort was worthless. So they need to be reused, and they not only need to be reused by developers, but they also need to be used by designers. And for that, a living style guide. So a living style guide is like just like a representation of the current status of your front-end code, without that you can render in your application. And something like that can be just like a really great communication device. You can tell your designer, here, this is the stuff we have, try to reuse it or give it to a new developer. And I think we are only like at the start of it, but this is a really good approach. And it can just create awareness of like all the things that are already there and that could be reused. So how does it work in theory? Like, how do we do this living style guide thing? The first step is always like we have to follow some sort of convention in our front-end code. So we can then in the second step kind of inspect the code and can expect certain things to be in a certain place and derive the style information from then, and to then render the style guide and profit. So this is just the theory part, pretty theoretical. So let's have one practical example that the SMURF gem can do today. And this is about a living Sass color style guide. And the goals behind that style guide is that the style guide should always reflect the current state of color usage in your application. And it should help the developers and designers to keep the color usage dry. And it's one really important thing about this living style guide thing is there should ideally be no additional effort beyond the initial setup. So you don't have to, I don't know, there's like things like KSS Rails that I think Twitter Bootstrap is using to create a style guide, but you have to really heavily annotate your CSS in order to create the style guide. And I've heard from numerous people that have tried it out in production projects that it's just like too much effort and you do it for 2 weeks and then after that you just write code and the style guide is outdated and all this effort was worthless. So if we try to do this living style guide thing, it always has to be like we just follow some convention and from there it should just work. Otherwise it's not going to fit into the development process. And as a little like bonus feature or so, the individual colors should be really, really easy to change and like ideally just one place. So the convention here is obviously, I mean, the most important convention is to put all your colors into SAS variables. And there's also like a little more complicated way about doing it. First of all, I recommend just describing all the literal colors that are used in your design somewhere. You know, just pick them all, put them in a list. Okay, this is all what we have. We give them some name that tells us a little bit more than just a hex value about what that color is like. And then in a second step, we map those literal colors to some more semantic colors that we will then use in our CSS. So for example, like with the text, we have like a light text color, a medium text color, and a dark text color. And if you can't, you know, for something like text or border colors or so, if you can't really express your colors with like a number of like 3 to 5 different adjectives, like light, medium, dark, very dark or something, then probably there's something wrong with this with your design in general or so. And then it becomes difficult to express them. But yeah, and those color variables will then be used in our actual CSS. And as a kind of like side excursion, there's also a convention for the SAS variables, for naming the variables, so that the pattern goes as follows. You have a modifier in the beginning that says something about what, you know, type of, how does it differentiate from other similar variables. So you can have like light, small, big, standard, default, stuff like that. Then you have an optional object part of the variable name that describes about like what is this variable actually about. So is it text, headline, user image, whatever. And then at the end you always specify what kind of what's actually in the variable. So is it a color, is it a font size, is it a border radius, is it a width? And you can kind of like follow that convention for all your variables, and they become a lot easier to read. Yeah, but this is actually not really connected to the style guide. So let's get back to the style guide. And so we followed that convention, put all our colors in SAS variables, and now we can use the SMURF, the SMURFville gem. SMURFville is the home of SMURF. And it's really super easy. It takes less than 5 minutes to install. You just have to add the gem. You have to tell it where your style sheets are. You have to mount the style guide so you can display it in your app, and profit. And this is what it looks like for an actual production application that reUsable is working on. And then you can immediately see like all the different colors that are used in your application at any given time. And you see the literal color names, and you see all the semantic color names that you map to it. And in brackets, you have the usage of the color. So if you have like 2 different colors that are, you know, pretty much exactly the same, you can see, oh, we use that like in 20 different times, and the other one we use only in 1 time, so you only have to change that 1 time, and suddenly you have a more consistent, more dry color scheme. And actually, we did this on a client project of ours that we worked on for like 1.5 years, and it turned out we used like 36 different shades of blue in there. It was like, you know, 3 different designers, 7 different front-end developers, everybody picking with different tools, and this is just what you end up with. And a tool like that can help you to organize that a little better. Yeah, and this is only the start of this like living style guide concept. And I mean, it's not that simple, like deriving that style information and rendering it. I think like the next step would be to do that for typography, and then also to just render like a matrix of all the modules that you have in your application. But it's not that easy, because yeah, you have to take a lot of things into consideration, and yeah, but working on it. And if anybody's interested in, come talk to me later. And yeah, and definitely do try this at home. As I said, it takes like 5 minutes, and if you are using SAS color variables, it can give you really nice insight into your application. And that's already it. So for credits, I definitely have to mention SMAX, which SMURF, I mean, the naming similarity is not by chance, is very, very, very heavily relying on, which is just like, it's just a general approach for CSS, and it's by Jonathan Smook. He has a website at smax.com, and it's kind of like a free online book, and I definitely recommend you to check it out. And I also want to thank my company and my colleagues who helped me work on this. And yeah, for more information, you can go on GitHub to the Smurfville gem and into the wiki, and find some more information there. And that's it. Thank you. Questions? Yes. Mm-hmm.
Are there any other differences that you point out, or is that difference correct?
Yeah, so as far as I know, Bootstrap is using a project called KSS Rails, and that allows you to render style guides from your CSS. And what you have to do, kind of like above any module or above any part of CSS, above any partial, you kind of just have to put like something like RDoc or JDoc or whatever. You put like a bunch of extra documentation comments in your CSS, and KSS Rails is going to parse through that, and from that render out the style guide. And it looks really nice, and I mean, look at the Twitter Bootstrap site. It's really, really nice to kind of like look at all the different modules that Bootstrap provides, but it's like just a lot of effort to maintain it. And for something like a Bootstrap framework, you can do it, but for your application, it's like if you have to roll out features, you don't have the extra time to always like annotate your CSS in that way. And I think there are a lot of ways to actually derive style information automatically from your CSS or your SAS if you do it in the right way. For example, if you have like there's another project called Prometheus or something like that. And what he does is kind of like he just looks at the SAS and the nesting of it, and kind of like creates the matching HTML for that and tries to render a style guide from that. So approaches like that, where it's just like look at the SAS and just kind of like guess how you could render that so it makes sense for people. And if you change something in the SAS, it will be immediately reflected in the style guide. That's kind of like the goal behind it. But it's only the beginning yet. But do you write it? Like, do you keep on writing it?
You have to. Like, it's a discipline. It's
yeah.
It's a better way of writing, because you have to think about what you're writing. You have to think about your modules. You have to write it out so that somebody else can find out about it, and you have to write it so that your style guide can interpret it.
No, keep on.
But yeah, I think documentation is a much better, it's a better way because you have to think about it and you have to stay disciplined.
Yeah, but I think, I mean, as you mentioned, there's probably like some sweet spot in between. Yes. I mean, this is, I mean, for something as similar as variables, it's going to work to just, you know, parse it just like that. And the more complex the CSS structure is going to become, the more annotation you're going to need. But I think KSS Rails is going way above anything that's like needed. My opinion. Yeah?
Actually, within our company, we have this problem, which I don't see how any how Bootstrap or KSS or SMURF could solve, is the fact that some could you just have CSS hanging around that's doing nothing anymore. It's not being used. So I wanted to solve. I've been thinking about this process and how we can do that, and how as a developer I can know that everything is being used. There's not too much bloat. What I was thinking was to just have the designers write static HTML as the style guide, and that would be as a word test. That's the thing you can use. Anything else that comes out of the application is not allowed. Then you can check your CSS rules if they apply to a element within your style guide. So you can filter out the CSS that's not being used, and then it becomes not that trivial, but you can just take HTML out of your tests, parse that through the CSS that exists. Any selector that's not that's used in your HTML that's not in your CSS is probably not styled or not necessary. And boom, you have your design tested.
Yeah, I think that's.
That was a pretty cool idea.
It's a really cool idea to kind of have this kind of like visual unit testing for like you just render out all your modules and you apply them against your CSS, and you have like a list of all the modules that you have defined, and if you have like styles beyond that, they're probably not used. It's a great idea, but I think it requires a lot of discipline between like designers and developers, and I think we kind of like have to start. Well, this is an option. The other option would be, you know, something like that. You just provide better tools for better communication, and then I think we can get to a point where something like that would be possible.
The advantage is if you force your style guide to pre-exist the HTML, it's easy to choose your components from it. You always have to choose from the components or define a new one. If you want to modify a component, you know what you are modifying. You could annotate where it's being used via components. And it's tested. There's no bloat, which is an issue that I guess a lot of designers have with their CSS. And you have certainty of what's being used and what's not.
Yeah.
And there's no automation in generate your style sheet, but I think that automation is not really that necessary if you have the discipline, and specifically in a larger team, to just use the style guide that exists, and then everybody stays up to date.
I think for really big companies, this really is an option. Like Jonathan Smook with his SMAX approach, he worked at Yahoo, and there they had like a design team, and then they had like a prototyper team, and they would only write the CSS and the templates for the application, and then they had an engineering team who kind of like, you know, put that to work. And if you have that kind of setup, like that kind of like team size, then something like this is definitely an option. That like somebody, you know, writes a style guide, and then this is used for the actual application. But I don't know. We work more in like a startup environment, and everything is like always tight on time and tight on people, and you always have like only like half a designer and stuff like that. So there, it kind of becomes difficult. How are we on time?
Should be fine.
Okay. So, Dave.
The one thing about what you said for integration, you're basically using your integration test to find out which pieces of styling are actually used. Is that as a design? I only back in there, but I know that generally integration tests follow the happy path, right? And you actually have to enforce a little bit more discipline in following the not happy paths, which are sometimes worth testing, but that includes exercising all of your JavaScript. It may or may not render DOM elements, and that also includes exercising all the unhappy paths, or at least you get like your error divs that pop up. So you can make sure you hit all your styles. But otherwise, the first thing that I would do with my thread test suite, which does all of the happy paths, would be eliminate all the styles for errors and eliminate all the styles of generated DOM elements, and then my design would kill me. So you have to extend kind of your testing methodology to then tell you that the backend code generated in DOM is all properly marked up, it won't give you your JavaScript coverage. There's no good C0 coverage tool that exists for else I know for JavaScript exercise, and you'll miss things that only appear in error conditions. So that's a great idea. That's kind of my spontaneous solution in my head. We talk about this, but there's more to it. Even if you're doing really good TPD backend stuff to make sure the front end stuff is all integrated as well.
Yeah, but it's a good goal. Question there?
I know that this solves part of the problem from from the CSS to layout, but a lot of problems come from the other direction, from the layout to the CSS. How would think to solve this thing? You know, for example, let me give you an example. You say you tell about modules and so on. Part of those things is well discussed because those on that rated object or called object oriented CSS. It's not object oriented, but it has this idea of creating modules and so. And the way that she approached it looked like that she did the other direction. I mean, she, for the well-documented thing that she said about the media object that or the boxes on Facebook, she went from the layout to get a proper CSS, not the other way around.
But I'm not really suggesting that you should.
What it seems to me that it helps to the other direction.
Definitely.
You have a nice CSS, you get a nice style. But wouldn't it be better if you could get a way to design a better CSS, of course with proper rules and proper guidelines like the ones that you proposed and so on, to get the other direction, make it easier to design it.
Yeah, but I think that's the approach. Like you want to decouple your markup from your CSS, and you want to like put that into like a whole different bucket, which allows you then to kind of like design things, or like the CSS should be about the design. We shouldn't have like classes that say something like this is the posts list or something, because that doesn't matter or in most cases it doesn't matter like what you're actually rendering there. It's like the design, for the design it matters like how does it look like is it what kind of colors does it have. So this is why you should use really generic classes like a box or something. So because the box style is going to be directly derived from the design of the designer, and it's not like something like, oh, in our database we have a box, so we have to shove it into the front end somehow, and we have to put some classes on it. It should go the other direction, just as you say.
Yeah, but for example, you say, okay, scaling is not good, and you specify the classes in a way that it would be container, and then the title, body, and so on. Isn't this inconsistent with what you said that the design should be consistent? I mean, this way you just prevent bad design to bad CSS to weak attributes towards, but it makes it inconsistent. I mean, if you put something dash link means that we have different links styles when the link should be consistent.
Yeah, then you should probably have a link module in that case. Yeah. So.
Did you see this kind of bad design, good design, and the implications of translating this to CSS and so on? How do you think you could solve this kind of thing?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of difficult to really get it right. Like, it's not like you have like one box in your layout, and this is going to be one CSS module. It's probably going to be, I don't know, if you have like a navigation list or so, then you might have like a navigation list module that kind of like styles like how, like if it's a horizontal list and stuff like that. And then in there you might have like something like a menu button module or so that styles how a button looks like. And you can also use that menu button outside of this navigation module. And that way you can kind of like achieve the consistent design. But it's really hard to get it right, to kind of like have the right kind of granularity. But we're already just starting with this, so I think that's something we have to figure out along the way.
Just a short question out of curiosity. With HTML, you showed your example, which was the divs within divs and div for the heading. Is that something you would use in production, or was it just in there for the example?
Which HTML?
There was a set of HTML where you showed how to like see that on top of your HTML.
With the box, was it?
Yeah, there
Yeah.
a div with a title in there instead of using heading element? Is that something you view in production like that, with only divs that have no semantics at all?
Depends. I don't know. It's like this thing about this semantic markup. I think it's overrated. Like, it produces the same output. Sometimes it makes sense to kind of use a header element there to make it more obvious for somebody else looking at it. But for me, it's optional, and people shouldn't be so dogmatic about it.
So we could then just make the use tables.
Hmm?
Then we also just use tables instead of divs.
Well, it depends. There are use cases where it makes a lot of sense, and there are use cases where, for this heading, can make a difference, doesn't have to be. But I don't know. I mean, that's up for everybody. I just want to kind of like contend this, that, it's not always important. And it's also hard because everybody has different understandings about, what semantic markup should be used in what case and stuff like that. So, but I definitely don't want to say, stop using semantic markup, just, don't be so dogmatic about it.
I would say quite almost the same as that, in that where you have your in the case of HTML, you had and I would write it with some sort of heading element.
Probably, yeah.
And the class you have as inbox heading. But doesn't that mean you are repeating yourself? This is a case.
Yes.
Not repeating yourself. You are defining the thing twice.
But you have two different things. You have the structure and the style, and they should be segregated in most cases. I mean, there are some cases where you can still use your H2, and you shouldn't. It's not like never, 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 never do it. But it's just a general thing. It makes it more flexible. And if you need that flexibility in that case, you should do it that way. And if you don't care about the flexibility in that case, you can also do it the other way.
It's just the description. When you have your module, your box, your mbox, if you put a heading inside it, if you put an H1 inside it,
Mhm.
that's what we HTML5 now says, but headers and everything that goes H1s, really need the others. So a heading inside an mbox is an mbox heading. It already is that. And if it's no longer a heading, then it wasn't a heading. Because your structure changes, your style is going to change. You don't have a heading that you're going to style as a heading that's not actually a heading. They're describing is what I'm trying to say, and you're describing it twice.
Mhm.
It's just it seems confusing to me. It's also redundant somewhat, and if something changes, you're going to have to change both things anyway.
Well, it depends. If you just want to change something about the hierarchy of your markup or so, you can just change it, and the style will be the same. So those are those cases. Like,
So that seems like a design problem, because if your hierarchy was wrong, then what is your...
It's not per se. It could be, you might want to change your semantics. You might say, okay, I don't want to consider these headers anymore because it's completely screwing up screen reader.
yeah,
We're making this part of the article. This just doesn't work anymore. Somebody put a section wrong, whatever. I'm fixing my semantics now, and shit, now I also need to fix my CSS. If you completely decouple them, if the CSS has no connaissance of the structure or the semantics of HTML, they're not going to influence each other anymore whatsoever. So your designer is completely free to do what he wants. He controls the classes, and the person who does the screen read and the HTML can worry about the own element types. And they each do their own thing. And there's no way that they're going to be influencing one another, and hence you're safe and good to go.
Okay, if we now consider the pure application of that, that means having a class for every single element on your page.
So
And facts.
You already have it on.
it's not like you have to write it over and over again, it gets generated for you. What do you care? Really,
Hey, guys, I'm just going to ask, lunch is being served. Maybe we can continue the discussion over there. Before we also finish now.
just one more thing. I want to recommend. Yeah, I'm really excited about this whole discussion, and that we all, get excited about this modular front-end stuff. And I recommend seeing Roy's talk tomorrow, which is really hilarious and also about modular front-end. And
It's different